assessment of technology in Chapter 7, but I also want to focus a little bit about using technology to assess your students. There are lots of tools available online, and so I thought we'd review a little bit about them. Um, so after we're done with this presentation, you should understand the role of technology in assessment. You should be able to define what a rubric is and the purpose of a rubric. Should also be able to discuss the principles behind creating a rubric and be able to create a rubric for one of your lesson plans. So, when you put the power of technology to work for all students, it requires a broadly conceived approach to educational change that integrates new technologies and curricula with new ideas about learning, teaching, and assessment. What this means is that you need to start looking at traditional methods of teaching and the traditional ways that you have been learning to teach or you have been taught, and you have to look at it with a new eye. You have to understand how you take a lesson plan. For example, students will list 5 things that they learned about the Civil War, and instead of having them write it down on paper, think about how they can create or develop or analyze using technology. Assessment is it takes place constantly. I mean, as an educator, you will come to the point where you're going to be able to look at students and know whether or not they are knowing, but you still have to formalize your assessment a little bit. You need to be able to document, even if it's something as simple as an observation. As you're walking through, you want to go through and document how students are being assessed. So, in each of these scenarios, you can see that an assessment is going on. One of these is a project presentation, as you can see in this first. This is all performance. Here you have 2 teachers working with a student to assess. Here you have another person, a group assessment, and then finally another presentation. In today's society, we tend to teach to the test, and by that I mean that we have these standardized tests that have become really, really important in the funding of our education. It's also very political, and it is heading towards the point where teachers are also going to have to accept their finances based on these student tests. But a lot of people believe that the test is just a superficial form of assessment. It only takes a snapshot picture of a student on a given day or time. And so it doesn't really examine the whole student. They are pushing towards a more expanded version of assessment where you're going to have portfolio assessments and projects and creations that the students have done, and it's really easy to pull that all together with technology. So why do we assess? Well, obviously provide diagnosis. We see where students are struggling and where they can improve. We set standards with assessments. If we test 100,000 third graders and all of them know how to add 3 plus 3, then that's a standard. We know that students in the third grade should be able to add 3 plus 3. We evaluate the progress that they've made towards a given objective. And then we communicate results to the students and let them know how they're doing. And that also motivates them to perform even better, or at least you hope that it does. Standardized tests are going digital, although that is not a given at this point, but you are seeing more and more standardized tests going to a computer. And that will just give a capsulated view, as I've said, just a snapshot view of a student's learning. And then these standardized tests are going to be used in conjunction with performance-based assessment that teachers will put together in the form of portfolios. Now, special ed, just I want to point out that special ed already uses portfolio assessments, and that is just coming into the mainstream. It is a very good way of showing how students learn throughout the course of a year. So, when do you assess? Well, you should assess constantly. You should assess before a lesson so that you know your students and what their skills are already and where they are at in a point in time. And, maybe they don't need to learn what you've got planned for the day. You should assess continually during a lesson plan. And then you assess after the lesson plan to make sure that your students did learn what was the objective. As we go through types of authentic assessments that teachers use, you also need to think about the technology that we've learned about so far and imagine how you would use them for assessment. So if, for example, you had your students develop a Glockster, or if you had them develop a Padlet, or if you had them develop a survey or, a PowerPoint presentation, how would you use that for an assessment? So some types of authentic assessment, which goes to that authentic learning, is surveys of your class, observation, tests that you make as a teacher, quizzes, exams, things that, I've often felt that whenever I've used a test that came with the curriculum or the textbook, that it just wasn't exactly what my students need. They tended to do better with tests that I create. Written compositions and essays are also a form of authentic assessment. Interviews with the students and oral presentations. Projects, experiments, and performance tasks. And finally, portfolios. So online surveys are really easy to do. We haven't really covered them yet so far, but before lesson, if you do a survey with your students, and you've done a couple of them through your learning activities. I've got surveys that I've integrated throughout the learning activities. You can gain an understanding before the lesson of what students already know. During a lesson, you can put open-ended questions on those surveys and let students know, what others, how they responded. Students always like seeing where they are in a class. And after lesson, you could maybe do an exit ticket and have students say what they learned in the lesson. So here's some different free online survey programs. Padlet we did last week, which I love Padlet, but you can also look at SurveyMonkey, Google Forms, SkyDrive also has one, and Zoomerang. Applets are warm-ups that you can have students do. I used to do 5-minute warm-ups when the students came in on the overhead projector. I would have a warm-up activity that they would pull out their journals and they would do that warm-up activity, and that allowed me to do some of the daily activity, the attendance and collecting homework, and the students would be working right away. So prior to teaching a concept, you can have students work on a warm-up, maybe some of these math interactives or grammar interactives that are out there. And then you can also do a cool down afterwards with an applet. Use the same or different applet before and after, and that would extend and deepen their learning. Polling is another great way to check for understanding. Now, these are clicker response systems, and they are becoming more and more popular. As you are walking around, you can throw out a question to the students, throw it up on the overhead or on the smartboard, and then have the students answer the question. That also helps you to learn or see whether or not you are actually teaching the concept. Maybe students aren't understanding you, and if you do a question and 85% of the students are answering it wrong, it might be you and the way that you are teaching that is causing that. So here's some different free poll programs and technology hardware that you can look at to understand how polling happens in a classroom. Writing assessments, which you do anyway, but I found that students like to use technology and word processing programs to write a lot more than they do a pen and paper. And I know there's two sides to that coin. A lot of people feel that students should write by paper and by hand. I have found in my experience that when you sit a student down and you put them on the internet and you tell them that they're going to have a live audience, they are going to write, and they are going to write a lot more. So, how they do that, but here's some different programs. Obviously, WordPress is a blogging application website, but you also have Google Docs, Microsoft Word, which is also on SkyDrive, Scribus, which is a desktop publishing program that is open sourced, Mixbook, and Lulu. Reading can be assessed. We've used Digo. I think we looked at this a little bit before, but Digo is an excellent tool for online reading and for online note taking. I use it all the time. I love it. I highly suggest that you test it out. You open up your Chrome, you go to the Digo website, you sign up for a free account, add that Digo to your Chrome, and then when you are viewing a website, you can click on the Digo button, and I'll show that to you in a second, and it will allow you to make notes. Okay, so let's hop over to Google Chrome and I'll show you exactly how Digo works. So I've set up my Chrome and I've pulled up a website that I'd like to go look at and take notes. You'll see that I have the Digo applet here, and all I need to do is I need to just click that button and tell it that I would like to annotate this page. It now makes this a read and write where I can edit and highlight. So as I'm reading and I say, okay, I'm going to highlight this, and then I'm going to tell it what color I want it. And you can tell it blue, you can tell it green, you can tell it whatever color you want it to be. I can also add a sticky note. Need to show my students this information, and then post it. Okay, so now I have a note. I can flag or reorganize however I would like to tag this. I can add it to a list of maybe a research project that I'm working on, and then I just hit save. To access all of your files, you just go to the Digo button and you can go to your library, and it will show all of the different articles that you have annotated or highlighted. So this is a really, really good tool to use when you are doing research on the internet. This way you don't have to print out reams of paper, but you have your notes right there. Okay, so now if you want to print your notes, you would go to the share button, and then you want to generate a report. And then you will see all of the notes that you took for a specific website. Okay, some more now that we've done with the Digo. Another area we want to look at is measuring what counts, memorization versus understanding. Now, there is debate on whether we should even still teach memorization techniques because knowledge is so available readily with our cell phones. I think that there is a reason that we still need to teach memorization skills to our students. Um, and you will have to make that decision yourself. I personally think memorization strengthens those cells, and there's a lot of things that you need to know that you won't always have a calculator there for you, but that's my opinion. So there, I do have a article I'd like you to read, and I've also got the link. It's called "Measuring What Counts: Memorization versus Understanding." That I think is a really, really um, good overview on what we need to do with technology. While you're reading this, I'm going to have you list three elements that factor into the creation of a project. You're going to list some of the benefits according to the article of project-based learning, and what a recommendation for beginning projects in the classroom. So what is a rubric? Well, a rubric is a scoring or evaluation tool that is used primarily for subjective assignments, projects, presentations, performances, writing presentations. It provides essential criteria or end levels of performance. And a rubric can be paper or it can be placed online. So why should we use rubrics? We can use rubrics to set goals for our students, to define our expectations. I like creating rubrics just so that I have a really clear idea of what I expect from the student. It helps to demystify the grade that you are giving a student. And the purpose is to help students by clarifying your expectations to them, giving them a way to plan their assignments, and it also encourages students to be self-directed, to learn independently, and complete projects on their own. The purpose of developing a rubric for educators is that it helps us to construct an assignment to clarify exactly what we want. It helps us with grading. It standardizes the grading for subjective reviews. It simplifies it, and it also speeds up the process. It also allows you to provide feedback on assignments and give you a clear explanation for why you graded an assignment the certain way. The components of a rubric include the assignment directions, and then a separate sheet should include the essential criteria, the levels of achievement, and descriptors. When you construct a rubric, you need to reflect on the purpose for the project and the categories that you want to include. You need to develop the criteria, decide how many levels that you want, create definitions, and then weighting if you need it. Now, fortunately, you don't have to do all of this from scratch. There are a lot of options available, and we're going to look at those in a minute. This is what a rubric typically looks like. You can see where you have, this is a reflection rubric. You can see on the first column that these are criteria. What have I learned? What have I learned about working in a group? And then these are the levels of performance. So, and you could go, I prefer to start with excellent and then work down. That's just my own preference, but I've seen, where it goes from 1 to 4. I use point system, 1, 2, 3, 4. Some people will do percentages, it just depends, and you can assign as many points as you want. And then you do an in-depth on what an excellent reflection paper would look like, or what a good performance. Now, I don't always use the word good. Sometimes I'll use the word developing, because a lot of, good or developing or, beginning, that shows that you are starting on the skill, but you just haven't quite gotten there yet. So here's a sample teamwork rubric. So there's expectations for group members, the participation of the group members, and level of involvement as a team member, and the quality of work as a team member. So here you have, the team rubrics. Here are the areas that we are evaluating, the criterion. And then these are the weights and the specific um, descriptors of the level that you want. So a person who is constantly talking to others in the room and rarely works on task, then they're at a level 1. Okay, but a level 4, they're always following the steps of the task and sometimes go beyond the concepts. Sample project rubric can display expectations for organization, for mechanics, for the content, and for the presentation itself. So this is a sample second grade rubric. Now notice in this rubric I have found 3 facts for the internet about my dinosaur. I'm using stars here. You can also, if your students don't read, you can develop rubrics that show, you have to get creative, but, maybe instead of having, like I can wash my hands, you would have a picture of somebody washing their hands after they go to the bathroom and then, stars after it. So you can use rubrics even for early childhood. So this sample rubric is for a 6th grade multimedia presentation on ancient civilizations. Now notice this rubric is designed a little bit differently. I've got the points possible, and then the self-assessment column, and then the teacher assessment column. Here's a sample rubric for the book report website, developing a website. And again, this is just, you can have 1 to 5, exceptional and poor, and then just the characteristics there. So it doesn't break it down step by step, it just gives you the actual criteria. Okay, so rather than do a whole nother presentation on chapter 7, I have uploaded the PowerPoint presentation from the textbook. You can use this as a study guide if you'd like. If you have any questions, make sure that you post them to the help board.